following video interview is controversial in nature and does not necessarily reflect the views of the producers nor mainstream academia. The viewer is encouraged to refamiliarize themselves with the standard historical and scientific text before making presumptive conclusions.
I'm not surprised at this recent scandal that they dug up about the dumbness of the school books they're writing. Here's the government telling these outrageous lies to every child in America, every adult in America, and every old person in America. They've been stealing and hiding technology for so long, they don't want it to move any faster.
Welcome to the 33rd Parallel, a video series about science, technology, and the politics that control it. For a long time now, scientists have been busy congratulating each other for proving some aspect of the theory of relativity. As recently as 1995, they've rewarded their colleagues with Nobel Prizes and declared long-held beliefs about the theory as proven fact. Meanwhile, we, as part of the unwashed masses, wait patiently for our eminent scientists to let us in on the joke. Aside from the atomic bomb, just what part of this illustrious concept can we hold in our hands and use in our daily lives? One is left wondering if scientists even care about the day-to-day phenomena that are still left unexplained. We may ask, what is gravity? And the answer is gravitons. Or, what is electricity? Well, it's electrons. Aside from their precious relativity, are there coexistent theories that are worth considering? After all, the majority of our greatest scientists, Michael Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, Sir William Crookes, and Lord Kelvin, never even heard of relativity, nor would it have helped them if they did. Just what made scientists want to embrace the peculiar claims of a second-rate clerk in a Swiss patent office as the preeminent end-all to scientific progress? As almost an apology to the unworkability of Einstein's rants, we are offered a steady stream of new and ever more complex quantum mechanics and string theory to dazzle us, or baffle us beyond belief. If Michael Faraday and Sir William Crookes never used relativity to further their understanding of gravity and electrodynamics, just what did they base their experiments on? And why do we never re-examine those concepts? Is there a forgotten physics with a different set of rules, hidden away from us early in the last century by a powerful elite who fear that the technology based on it will strip away their power and wealth and liberate us from their grip? A bold and outrageous statement that can never be proven, right? Wrong. William R. Lyne is our guest tonight. He's the author of 3 books.
Pentagon Aliens, formerly Space Aliens from the Pentagon, now in its 3rd printing, Occult Ether Physics, and The Free Energy Surprise. Mr. Lyne was born in Big Spring, Texas, and raised in the boom towns of the great West Texas wildcatters. He had the opportunity of being educated about fuel and its impact on industry firsthand. From there, he pursued an interest in aviation in Army Air Force, where he earned a position in Air Force Intelligence. He has acquired a BS degree with a double major in Art and Industrial Technology from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas in 1969. He also has the distinction of living in New Mexico for the past 25 years. during a time and place where knowledge of saucer technology necessarily meant knowing individuals who worked on top-secret projects at Los Alamos and Alamogordo, where individuals such as Werner von Braun and his Nazi collaborators were well known to the community at large, where, much like those individuals who had the misfortune of living in or near Mena, Arkansas, never got the chance to tell the rest of the world what was really going on. Well, today Mr. Lyne will do just that. Mr. Lyne, welcome to the 33rd Parallel.
Okay, I'd like to get into some free energy technology now. The first thing I'm really fascinated about is your discussion of the atomic hydrogen torch. And if anybody's a welder these days, they probably haven't even heard of an atomic hydrogen torch. Maybe you might want to explain a little bit about that and why it's so special.
Interesting thing is, since I came out with this material just this year, in the immediate future, General Electric is now issuing a new version of an atomic hydrogen torch. Isn't that
How
interesting?
about that?
And
How did that happen?
a person phoned me the other day and told me all about it. And they have a new atomic hydrogen torch they're preparing to release for the public. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Isn't that a coincidence that it was dead for all those years,
Yeah.
and now I published something on it, and now they're coming out with it?
Now, I wonder how they're going to explain the inordinate amount of energy. You might want to maybe talk about why this is so special, this torch.
Well, of course, the discovery of the atomic hydrogen, what I call the atomic hydrogen process, was supposedly made by Langmuir about 1909 or 1912. And he was a chemist who had a lot of discoveries in the area of electrolysis and so forth. And he claimed, and of course the thing about Langmuir is he was an early relativist. So
Is that right?
he believed in the relativistic, what I call RQMs, relativistic quantum mechanics. And he basically, believed in the idea that however much energy was produced when the hydrogen recombined was the amount of energy it took to separate the hydrogen molecules into from diatomic molecules into monoatomic hydrogen. So basically, this process involves the separation of hydrogen, which tends to come as diatomic molecules, two atoms together, into its separate atoms. And then when those atoms come back together, they release 109 kilocalories per mole.
It sounds like a lot.
The molecules, per to mole. And so that is a lot of energy. Now, what I found was a well-known Encyclopedia of Science, which says that it takes 103 calories per gram mole to separate the hydrogen, although the relativistic quantum mechanics say that it takes the same amount of heat to separate the molecules as you get back when they recombine.
So you're getting nothing in this
You end
reaction.
up getting it all, that you're just using electrical energy to separate it, and then you get it back when it combines. Well, why even do it? I mean,
Right.
if you could just do it with electricity, except you get temperatures that are far above what you would get with an electric arc.
In fact, you discovered an old text on this reaction, and even a photograph of an atomic hydrogen torch. Hydrogen being set free in a chemical reaction is often more reactive than hydrogen gas. The activity of such nascent newborn hydrogen in the act of liberation from its compounds is due to the hydrogen being in the atomic state. And down here, hydrogen molecules dissociate to atoms endothermically at high temperatures. Heat of dissociation about 103 calories gram mole. An electric arc or by irradiation. The hydrogen atoms recombine at the metal surface to provide heat for the acquired welding.
Now, I've been assured that this has to be a typographical error on the part of the Van Nostrand Encyclopedia people, even though this particular paragraph comes out of what is something like the 5th edition. Now,
Is that right?
they're
so 5 editions of mistakes.
Yeah, 5 editions. They have just carried this nobody's caught it, you know. And the thing is this company published books on Tesla at one time when Tesla was alive.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, same company.
Well, that's interesting that they would claim that, you know, they've made mistakes in 5 editions. Here we have this is circa 1933. It's a welding book, welding and its applications. And it has here atomic hydrogen arc welding. In general, it says here, molecular hydrogen, or hydrogen in its normal state as distinguished from atomic hydrogen, is a diatomic gas. That is, each molecule consists of 2 atoms. When hydrogen is broken down into the atomic form, it is very active and has great tendency to recombine to form molecular hydrogen. This is exactly what happens in the atomic hydrogen process. When the molecular hydrogen passes through the arc, much of it is changed into the atomic state and thus absorbs considerable amount of energy. In escaping the arc stream, these atoms recombine into molecules again at the outer edge of the arc fan, and the extra energy is released as heat. This extra heat is added to the intense heat of the arc itself, produces a temperature that is somewhat higher than either the ordinary arc or the gas flame. Theoretical temperature of the atomic hydrogen flame has been found to be 7,254 degrees Fahrenheit. However, heat absorption due to the formation of atomic hydrogen, well, it says here, reduces this to 5,340 degrees. But it talks about the what you're talking about as far as recombining.
Yeah.
So, so all these books are making mistakes, I guess.
The thing that's interesting is that liquid hydrogen is 99% atomic hydrogen. Or,
right?
no, there's ortho and parahydrogen. I can't remember which is which, but one of those states of hydrogen has a lot more energy. Just because they're not pointed opposite directions. The atoms are pointed the same direction. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is another free energy process hiding in there between ortho and monohydrogen. Ortho and parahydrogen. And because it takes less energy to create parahydrogen than you get back when they convert.
How about that?
And that's just another one of those little free energy processes. The same thing happens, when you compress it and liquefy it, it takes less energy to vaporize it again than it took to compress it.
Really?
In other words, when you can vaporize it easier than you compress it, so you get a gain in energy just like that. And you can do the same thing with liquid air.
It happens quite a few times in nature, and yet we're taught to ignore that again. I don't see how people.
See, I don't think it's
I don't see
magic.
how science people can explain this stuff away all the time.
I just think that these elements are absorbing energy from cosmic sources when they're in a state of change. And because Tesla's theory of radioactivity is that the radioactive elements are not producing the radiation. They actually are being produced by the element reacting with zero-point radiation, what he called the primary solar rays or starlight, a very high-frequency form of radiation that's produced in stars. And he called this the primary solar rays, and I call it the zero-point radiation because this matches the definition today. And this radiation is ubiquitous. It comes from all directions. It's so high frequency it doesn't react with most matter at all. It passes right through everything. But I believe that certain elements, when they react and change, when they're in a change of state, or let's say they're in an act of mutation, such as in K-capture, that they react with this and produce a radioactive effect. Because I don't think they've ever proven that mass loses weight through radiation. That's all strictly mathematical predictions. Yeah.
Ah.
According to E equals mc squared, if something sits there and puts out this high energy radiation, it's supposed to eventually convert all the mass, as long as it's producing radiation, into pure, what they call pure energy. And that's the biggest joke I've ever seen in my life. There's no such thing as pure energy. What would be pure energy? Energy is the
energy
ability to do work. How can an ability have a pure form and some physical
So in a way, it's a process of transition
Yeah.
that creates the work.
It's just the potential that exists. That's all energy is. It's not a physical entity any more than time is some sort of little entity flying around in space. Time is just a fiction that we've invented just as a convenience to describe the rate at which events occur. And
all of a sudden now we're supposed to think that it's an entity in and of itself.
yeah, and we could travel in it, you know. Like
Maybe pretty soon they'll have time particles like they have
Yeah.
gravitons and things like that.
Timatons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chronotons. Oh no, I better not say something like that. Next thing you know, I'll be seeing it in print.
Yeah, they'll think that's a great idea. Tesla has a very interesting take on iron, for instance, here. He talks about it in terms of electricity. Let's see. Unless we should make a radical departure in the character of the electric currents employed, iron will be indispensable. Yet the advantages it offers are only apparent. So long as we use feeble magnetic forces, it is by far superior to any other metal. But if we find ways of producing great magnetic forces, then better results will be obtainable without it. In fact, I have already produced electric transformers in which no iron is employed and which are capable of performing 10 times as much work per pound weight as those with iron. This result is attained by using electric currents at a very high rate of vibration produced in novel ways instead of the ordinary currents now employed in industries. I've also succeeded in operating electric motors without iron by such rapidly vibrating currents, but the results so far have been inferior. He has a whole different take on...
He's talking about replacing iron with aluminum.
Yes.
You see, now, you see which way he's moving towards something that's lightweight. And I have heard this before, that aluminum can be made to function as a ferromagnetic material.
Aluminum.
Yes.
How about that? And you feel that Tesla might have been onto this?
Yes, I think he might have developed this. He disclosed that he had a special generator that his description of this generator's output was so phenomenal that it's almost incredible. But he said it was composed of aluminum, iron, and copper combined in an unusual or novel way. And so I've been mystified by this for quite some time. And there's one of watt-hour meters.
This is what you were alluding to, or you feel that Tesla was alluding to, this being a Tesla invention originally, where he basically this is an elaboration on his unipolar generator, which he was experimenting with. This might have been one of the ultimate results of it. Could you go further into that?
Well, I just kind of stumbled across this with at the time, back in the late 70s, I had an apartment in my house, and I wanted to know how much electricity was being used internally in that one apartment. So I picked up a couple of antique watt-hour meters in Albuquerque at a salvage place, but these were antiques, and they were 2 110 meters, which I've been told are very expensive now to get one of those kind of meters. But anyway, I got these for a couple of dollars a piece. And I hooked them up in the apartment, but there were no labels on what was the in wire and what was the out wire. These were so antique that they just had posts on there for connecting wires, and there was no label. So I just kind of figured out, well, let's see, I'll run the end wires in here, and I'll have 2 of them to do 220 for this apartment. Apparently, I hooked them up backwards, and what they would do is the meter would spin quite rapidly when power first started to be used in the apartment. And the more power, they began to slow down, and finally they would get, when the power usage was higher, they would just sit and vibrate. And I called it snoring, because these things made a vibration. The whole house would vibrate with these things. I mean,
Really?
yeah, it'd make the whole house shake. And if the power usage went up higher, they went in reverse. And the electric bill on the whole complex dropped by about 1/3. So these
So
meters
it's
appear
putting
to be
electricity into the system.
they appear to be generating power. And so I just got to when I was at a salvage place looking for some metals and whatever, in my little inventor trip that I do, and there was an old man there, and his name was Dort, and he was from Virginia, and he says, my father invented, and I started talking to him about these watt-hour meters because he was interested in this sort of stuff, and he says, well, my father invented the original generator that's used on highly top-secret Navy subs today. And
Here we go with
it
the
was
subs
based on
again.
a Tesla invention, and the Nazis stole it. And now the government uses it, and it's highly classified. And I told him about these meters. He said, when that meter is stationary and vibrating, he said, that's the center of load. He says, aluminum is the reflector, and copper is the active element, and iron is the magnetic. And he said that this kind of technology was incorporated in his father's invention, which is a Tesla oscillator. And in investigating these Tesla oscillators, Tesla had an oscillator in the 1890s that had a little piston in it that was driven by compressed air. And it only had to vibrate about a 1/16 of an inch, just hum. But the inductors, there were two inductors that were on a shaft that the piston was attached to, and these two inductors were just windings that cut the magnetic lines of force in these two big cores, and the windings were over 50 miles long in that. And so that would correspond to what Tesla talked about, 925 mile wavelength, which would be for the Earth about 13 and a half cycles per second. And this is what they use for ELF technology. And that means that the Navy submarines are not, that the ELF waves are used not only just to transmit messages, they're also used to transmit power. So the submarines actually, and this is what the Germans used in their electro U-boats.
Always the underlying theme of submarines and submarine power.
Yeah, it's
being
like
a clandestine type of piece of equipment to begin with, what better thing to power it?
Tesla said one of his greatest discoveries at Colorado Springs was the discovery of terrestrial waves that went from pole to pole. And that was one of the discoveries that he made. So basically this ELF technology would do nothing but like make this wave energy in the Earth accessible. And that would be how they would get a 13,000 mile range out of these submarines in World War II.
Well, we have up on the screen now Tesla's unipolar...
30,000 miles, take it back, 30,000 miles.
30,000.
That's a lot.
It sure is. His version of the unipolar generator, which, of course, as you can see, is very similar to the watt-hour meter, suspiciously similar in a lot of ways. And it's funny because when I heard you speaking about this once before, and even in your book, I'm thinking to myself, if this were to be true, that somehow they have surreptitiously been using this equipment, then I could pick up one of these meters somewhere, and the only working components, or the most relevant components, would be the disk and the magnets, and it would all be the same, and the rest of it would just be cosmetic or possibly a prop even. Well, that's pretty, stretching credulity to the limit, and I just wanted to see how far this idea went. So I went to my scrapyard, my local scrapyard, and was able to dredge one of these things up. Steve, can you get this? And as you can see, it's a I believe this is Westinghouse watt-hour meter, and it has, a lot of us have been looked at this from time to time in our backyard and wondered what all this wonderful dealy-bobs are up in the front here that runs all these great little dials and things, and it's just endless technology here. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, maybe it isn't what Mr. Lyne is talking about because of all this wonderful stuff here. But if it's true, all this stuff would be irrelevant. And I look back here and I found that there were 2 screws, and only 2 screws, holding this to the rest of the apparatus. And when this drops off, what do you have left here is the disc, the aluminum disc, the magnet here, and 2 electromagnets in the back.
And Tesla said it was essential the magnets were weak.
This is a weak magnet right here, a weak permanent magnet right there.
The reason for the weak magnet is so the magnetic field can be reversed and oscillate as it bounces off the aluminum.
Right. So here we have a relatively modern version of this, and it's a Faraday disc or a Tesla disc, more properly termed, running the whole show. Now, what I'd like to do is compare this to an older meter.
Well, according to their theory, they're saying that when current passes through the flux, or rather, the flux runs counter to the electrical flux that's created by the electromagnet. The idea is that when the flux passes through the disk, it's supposed to create a thrust on the disk and turn it a certain direction. And then the metering gadget is supposed to measure the number of times per second or minute or whatever that this thing turns, and all these little gears, and show you all these little digits to measure the amount of current that you're using. But the truth of the matter is there something here that bears looking at, because it's really a generator.
Now, what would be the purpose of them plugging in free energy generators to each of our houses?
It could increase the amount of power that they're actually being paid for. In other words, they could generate the seed power to make this thing oscillate, and then you would be billed for what the meter says you used, when in fact the meter is generating a lot of the power. Along with the poles and the plates underneath all the poles. They'll have copper plates under.
And you feel that the power stations alone wouldn't be enough to keep this moving along?
Yeah, I think, well, the power that we get here comes from the Four Corners region. That's way up in the north, on the corner of New Mexico is where that's coming from. And it just seems to me that there's an awful lot of power to be used there, and I don't know how they're generating that much up there for
Sure.
all the usage that's going on. I kind of tend to think that some of that power is coming from Earth source, and also from these little generators, which are also extracting that energy from the starlight or photon
Starlight?
energy, whatever you want. It's sometimes called starlight. Some people use the term zero-point energy, but that's an incorrect term. That's a relativist term. And that's the zero-point oscillations in the space-time continuum type of stuff.
We're back to that again.
The quantum fabric, or they use all these little weird terms. But that's not supposed to be true according to relativist theory, because you can never have one-half quantum. In other words, they use this all the time. They use this in the neutrino theory. But according to the relativist theory, you can never have a half quantum. You've got to have a full quantum, because the electron is indivisible.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that's not true.
Let's compare the fairly modern watt meter to something, again, we've dredged up in our little explorations. This thing is called a frequency relay. This is much older. This is circa 1930s, possibly. And as you can see, it has all the relevant components on it. It has the disk, the weak magnet, and the electromagnets, and a power resistor up here, but basically that's it. And this has an inhibitor that causes it to oscillate. So, your comments?
Yeah, it closes the switch. It shows here, it says close left at 61.9 cycles. Close right, they don't even show. But you see 2 little contacts, one here and one there. When this disc goes here, it closes that one. When it goes here, it closes this one. So it's oscillating back and forth. And I assume that it has something to do with these coils out here. But I don't know what a frequency relay would be, except this 61.9 is almost 62 cycles per second. It sounds to me like it. If the frequency isn't right, it opens or closes the switch here. But it also could be vibrating back and forth. It's got a limiter on it and a spring that makes it return to one position. But it looks like some very mysterious little gadget.
Yeah, it's suspicious how similar that is to a modern-day gadget without all the bells and whistles on the front. Apparently, they weren't too interested in concealing technology as much as
well, according to
more
that
sophisticated.
diagram that you had on there earlier, where it showed the unipolar generator, you can see where Tesla shows in the illustration that the positive charges go one way in the magnetic field and the negative charges go around the other way. Here, okay, now you can see one set of charges goes this way and the other set goes back this way. I can't see the markings on there, but in that magnetic field, because a magnetic field will do work on moving charges. And then the current is, you see you have a loop here. Here you've got a thing on the edge to pick up current, and here you got a return loop near the center. Now, Tesla had a subdivided disk. He said if you subdivided it this way, you could energize the field, and if you subdivided it the other way, you could de-energize the field. So if you had a disk with subdivisions going this way, back that way, this way, and back the other way, then when you spun this disk between these fields, you would cause an alternating magnetic field. If you put windings on that field, you have a generator that's far beyond the current that could be generated by this disk generator.
And this could be as big as the watt meters we just
Yeah.
showed. And that's all you need.
You get an oscillating magnetic field with windings around it, and you could get a lot more energy this way. And this is how most of his technology that got high output worked. But he described one generator that was special that we don't have anything on, the government's concealed it, that the output was phenomenal. And it sounds like the watt-hour meter from his description of it.
Wow.
From what we can get our hands on.
And just for good measure here, we have just another photograph of the same thing, basically, with the magnets and the disc, the weak magnets in the front here,
Yeah.
and the disc going through it. And this business.
That's just to measure the disk span. But the one that I hooked up backwards, the disk would rotate fastest when the current usage was lowest. And then as the usage went up, it began to sit stationary and vibrate, and then it began to rotate the opposite direction. And so it indicated to me it's generating more power than is being used at that point when it's going backwards. When it's at stationary, the center of load, it's generating as much as you're using. And the fact is during World War II, the Germans used some of these devices which were powered by projected beam. They were robotic devices.
What kind of projected beam? Would that be microwave?
Power beam. It's a special beam that Tesla developed, and he described it. He described the device around 1915 as his dirigible torpedo, which he had tested, and he said it was capable of 300 miles a second, which is 1.5 million miles per hour.
Do you think he was exaggerating? A lot of people feel
I don't think that was, it may not have been an exaggeration. I don't know how fast this ship that I saw was capable of going, but I know that it had a way of, and from the way I understand the technology, it's totally different from this air spike thing. The way the flying saucer technology works, it's explained in the 1890s writings of Tesla and a few other major scientists in the world. The ether particles are stretched in the front with a DC brush discharge. That brings in something called the tubes of force, which are electrical force that carry momentum. And when this enters the ship and are dissolved in the ship, it imparts momentum at 90 degrees to the electric and magnetic forces.
So in respect, you can control
yes.
momentum.
Yeah, it all
Or
has
you
to...
can you control inertia?
Yes.
Electrically.
Well, the way I understand it, and just from my own analysis, inertia and momentum are the same thing. Inertia is the tendency of a body to remain at rest or in its particular state of motion, whereas momentum, well, momentum is the same thing. Bodies in motion tend to remain in motion. However, according to Tesla and J.J. Thomson, the discoverer of the electron, momentum is the product of these tubes of force which exist in space, and they're at random until they're united by this brush discharge or by a body moving through space. Then that body accumulates a certain number of these tubes, and that imparts momentum to the body. So if you can block these ether particles from passing, you can block inertia. And that's exactly what Tesla's...
So this is actually in the literature by J.J. Thomson and Tesla.
Yes.
We're talking the 1800s.
Yes.
Getting back to saucer technology, German saucer technology, you claim in your book that you were at a salvage yard and had collected something. In fact, you have a photograph in the book. You call it a Pt.2 compass. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, literally, Pt.2 compass means polar slave compass. Tochter meaning daughter, so it's kind of a little humor in there, German humor, that the daughter is equivalent to a slave. But what that means is this is a slave compass, so there's a master compass, which is a gyro. The gyro is the master compass, and the polar slave compass will then pick up the heading that is calibrated into the master gyro, which this particular device it's mounted this way, so the dial is 360 degrees this way. It's set off in 30-degree increments, and it has a dial here, which you turn 30 degrees left, 30 degrees right. You can also do 60, 90, any 30-degree increment. But this device then has a little electric motor on it, so that when the ship changes directions, let's say that you turn the flying saucer 90 degrees to the right. Well, the main compass is calibrated to show true north. So when the ship starts moving this direction, then this little motor cuts on and rotates a dial that's with gears on it around to show you the correct flight heading according to true north on the master compass. And the reason this kind of device was necessitated in the first place was because the flying saucer has an electric field around it that makes an ordinary compass totally useless. And another reason is the flying saucer moves so fast that you're going to be over the next state in a few seconds, if you don't cut the power. And so this particular one that I have is a primitive device compared to what they must have now, but it was the only thing they could come up with to navigate these saucers. And these devices which you have here, you have a couple.
Yeah, we have here something from an American salvage yard in California. Very similar to what Mr. Lyne's talking about as far as the German version, as far as the 30-degree increments, correct? And it has a dial which adjusts here. This thing is thrashed to bits, so you'll have to excuse its shape. And we have the specifications here. Indicator gyromagnetic compass type V7A, specification MIL 15126A, order number AF23804, stock number 6263-15700. Kierfot Company Incorporated, property of U.S. government. I bought it at a salvage yard, so everything's totally legal. And it's very similar to what Mr. Lyne is talking about in his book. You might want to point out the similarities or differences.
Well,
do you feel that this was from an airplane or saucer?
Yeah. This is Air Force, USAF, type V-7A. Now, this is not the same kind of device that I have, though, but it uses some of the same technology. This is a navigator's device that will give a true reading for north, south, in different degrees, and it's graduated for any of these headings on here. The one that I have, the reason I knew what it was when I saw it was because when I was a boy, I slept in the backyard to watch these ships coming from New Mexico at night, flying in squadrons, and they would turn in 30-degree increments, 30, 60, 90, 180, and I could tell they were at very high altitude, and I hadn't seen one up close. All I could do was see them in the sky at night, high in the sky, navigating, doing maneuvers, and I would see a bunch of them flying along, and I'd see one coming along, and it looked like a star, bright light, and it would go along and then suddenly do without slowing down, it would do an instant turn, angular turn, and it was in these 30-degree increments. Well, when I saw this device on a scrap heap in Albuquerque, I knew that's what it was. And I picked it up, and certainly the label on the back, on the side of it, showed that it was a Pyle-Tochter compass, and it was labeled KT-small p large 2, KTP2, manufactured by List on October the 10th, 1943. It was a guidance compass from a German 1943 vintage flying saucer. And
now,
the device, and this was when I bought it, was in 1979. It was classified. So how did it get in this scrap heap? Soon after I got this device, the government apparently found out that I had it. So they went to the scrap dealer to find out how he got it. And the scrap dealer then said, I got it from a guy at Sandia Base. So they went, the guy at Sandia Base was the guy who normally brought scrap released for salvage to him. This guy was stealing classified, he didn't know it was classified salvage when he stole it and sold it. And so they put him under surveillance, they caught him doing it again, and they put him in jail. And then that information got back to the scrap dealer and got back to me. So that was classified information. They weren't supposed to let that kind of information get out. The scrap dealer wasn't supposed to know it. I wasn't supposed to know it, but I know it. And I found it out. So I knew that they couldn't come and get this thing back from me without confirming what it was. And why was some device from 1943 still classified if it was nothing more than an inertial guidance system?
That's a good point.
And
If it's present on every airplane in the German Air Force, and it's present in every airplane.
The dial is in the
American
middle
Air
on
Force.
it, and it's clear that this device controls the direction of the flying saucer, and that the saucer can turn in any of these 30-degree increments, just like the ones that I saw.
But this one you feel is different in that this would be for an airplane?
Yeah, this would be for navigating, and what the purpose of this is you're using an inertial guidance system or navigational system to maintain a true north heading so that you know what direction you're really going.
Right.
Ordinary compass could be influenced by all sorts of things, magnetic declination, metal on the ship, electrical things can influence it, but on this device it's strictly inertial, so when they take off they calibrate the master compass. No matter which way the ship turns, it maintains its true heading in relation to this compass, and so they can always know what their heading is with accuracy for navigational purposes.
Also in this wonderful junkyard that we were in, there's another piece of salvage here called a master indicator gyro flux gate compass. Do you see any relation between these two?
Yeah, both of these more or less are the same thing. This is a World War II variety, and this is a later version, which you can see the jet plane on the pointer here, that this comes from the jet era. So as best I can tell, it may be made in the 50s, maybe 54 because of these numbers, in which case it's definitely in the jet plane era.
So it serves the same purpose.
Yeah, and it's smaller, more compact, and this is a World War II version that was used to get a correct heading with an inertial compass. And so you have this is the master indicator, as it says on its, it says master indicator. So this will give them a true heading for north, and then they can plan all of their navigation around that. They want to know where north is.
So the technology they might have quelled from this type of knowledge of inertial guidance systems to use on
but
the German
I think
type.
the device that I have, the Pfeiltochter compass, I believe that it originally was a Nikola Tesla invention that was developed in conjunction with Sperry Gyroscope Company in 1917, because there's a documentation in my book that Tesla tested a robotic plane on a round trip, 200 miles round trip flight in conjunction with Sperry. And
They
so,
mentioned the company name, Sperry.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah,
and,
they do a lot of
Elmer
compass.
Sperry was a friend of Tesla's. Tesla apparently developed this friendship and used Sperry to develop this thing on this robotic ship that was flown on a 200-mile. It was taken off, landed, taken off again and brought back, all robotically. And it was the first flight of that type, as far as I know. And I believe that because I've found several other technologies that were properties of the Sperry gyroscope, later Sperry Unisys, which end up in Nazi hands, there seemed to be a trading with the enemy thing going on there.
How about that?
And for instance, the Klystron tube, which was developed by the Varian brothers in 1939, was a Sperry property. And researchers claim that the Nazis had the Klystron tube and show diagrams of it in Nazi documents. So it looks like the Klystron found its way along with the Pfeiltochter.
The Nazis, the Nazis seem to have a very good handle on microwave technology.
Well, the first guy they sent over here in 1936, actually he was invited by the American Rocket Society and the National Geographic and the Smithsonian Institution and the Simon and Florence Guggenheim Foundation, was a scientist, a rocket scientist named Willy Ley. And Ley was actually
very
the
popular
tutor of von Braun.
Yes.
And Ley came over here at the invitation of the American Rocket Society and all the rest to work with Goddard. Now,
what's the time period we're talking about here?
1936. Actually, he was invited around 1935, and he came over here, and he defected.
There was research being done prior to 1935 on rocket technology
Yes.
by individuals other than John Goddard
Yes.
here in this country?
Robert Goddard.
I'm sorry, yes.
And
Robert
there was a rocket scientist who lived in Santa Fe from, I believe, the late 20s. I know he was here all during the 30s, and many people know him as a solar designer because he built a lot of solar houses and this sort of thing and wrote some books on the subject. But he was a rocket scientist whose rockets were actually outperforming all the other rockets before, but he used solid fuel. His name was Peter Van Dresser, and he was the author of the Van Dresser Constant, which von Braun talks extensively about when he talks about his plans to go to the moon. And because the Van Dresser's constant was used to compute the trajectory of the rockets, and it was also used to fire all those rockets into Belgium and England.
Let's talk a little bit about Wernher von Braun. His presence here in New Mexico apparently goes back a little further than is widely understood.
Yeah, this is all purged and kept out of the books. Nobody's ever told about this.
Right.
But Van Dresser was angry with Goddard because Goddard worked originally, as I said, Ley was sent over here, but Ley defected. So they had to find a replacement, and they took young von Braun and got him through his PhD program and promoted him as the director of research for rocketry in Germany and at the Peenemünde project, and they promoted him up and sent him over to replace Ley because Ley married a Russian ballerina named Olga Feldman and took out American citizenship papers by 1937. But Back in 1935, he had defected, so they had to get a replacement. Now, how they arranged this is beyond me, but sure enough, von Braun came over here to replace Ley to work with Goddard for 2 years. However, what I found out was that he was working in a secret project at Los Alamos called P.2, small p, large 2.
This is probably the most controversial part about it. It's one thing to say Wernher von Braun is present here prior to the war. Now you're claiming that he's responsible for technology other than rocketry.
You see, none of the misinformationists want to mention von Braun in relation to flying saucers. However, the Germans...
This is where you divert in your book, and you explain how you feel that he's very much involved, or had been very much involved.
I don't know whether Goddard knew about von Braun's work on the flying saucer, whether he was privy to it or not, but it appears that he may have been, because the U.S. government apparently didn't trust Ley at that time because he wasn't employed by the government. He worked as a writer. He was a talented, very talented, intelligent person. And I don't know whether he's still, he could even still be alive, I don't know. But he had studied with Hermann Oberth also, and who was the Hungarian rocket genius. But Goddard's rockets were outperforming all the German rockets, so they wanted to get what they could. That was the cover, but what they really wanted to do was test this flying saucer idea. And they didn't know, because the U.S. government had treated Nikola Tesla so shoddily that, as if they considered him nuts. And they wouldn't listen to anything he said. It was just that crazy old guy who comes in here wants to sell us on these ideas, these wild ideas about ships that, go, so fast and so forth and defy gravity. And so all of their experts, who were MIT people mostly, just slandered Tesla up one side and down the other and managed to convince the government that he was nuts. And so the Germans, they sent their man to cultivate Tesla's friendship. They had a guy named George Sylvester Furick in New York, came from a very well-known intellectual family, and Furick cultivated Tesla's friendship, persuaded him along the lines of helping with the German developments. And I don't mention this much in the book, but I've some I put in on this. This is
so you discovered a German connection with
Tesla.
There's
definitely. Tesla got the morning paper, the morning German papers at the German embassy every day. So he'd gotten pretty tight with the German embassy because he sold stuff to the Germans in the past. He offered...
This is prior to the war, so he doesn't feel that this is some kind of treasonous act.
Yeah, see, in World War I, in 1914, Tesla offered his turbine to the U.S. Navy, and they weren't interested, so he sold it to the German Minister of High Marine in 1914. So they were interested. They bought his turbine. And then, in World War II, he offered all this stuff to the government. He offered the U.S. government ELF technology in 1914, 15, along in there, 17.
Which they're using now as part of...
He offered them that technology then, and they turned it down, you see. And eventually the Germans got hold of the technology, and they were using it in World War II. They had submarines that used Tesla's oscillator to give them a 30,000-mile range. And
these were the electro U-boats.
Yeah. They had a Tesla oscillator that was driven partially off of thermodynamic and electromagnetic energy gathered from the Earth's field that oscillated at harmonic of the Earth. And they used a gas to drive a little piston that powered some electric inductors that cut the lines of force and generated electric current. This was a generator that Tesla developed in the 1890s and run by, more or less by gas, basically liquefied air. And
run through a Tesla turbine?
Yeah. Well, no, you run it, well, he probably used his pumps to compress the air in one stage of it, but what he was using was the same thing that Linde filed patents on soon after Tesla's laboratory was burned to the ground, which makes you wonder.
Another coincidence.
Another big coincidence. And the Germans were storing huge quantities of liquefied air before World War I. What were they going to do with all that stuff,
Sure,
you know?
Sure.
So that was their U-boat stuff, you know, and they were already planning on this stuff. Boy, it makes your hair stand on end to think how they moved into action so early, you know, to get this big thing going. But
so how does this tie into the P.2 project with von Braun and Tesla's technology? How did von Braun acquire what he needed to develop this?
Well, they knew that, you know, that they had questions, you know, about Tesla's claims. So naturally, they wanted a proof of concept. So that's what they did at Los Alamos from 1936 to 38. However, I know that they didn't get all the technology because the ship I saw in 1953 still had the bug in it of precession problems.
And you felt that it looked like it was lost.
Yeah, it had a precession problem, which if they had gotten all the technology from Tesla, which Tesla had, they would have known how to solve that problem, and so would the U.S. government. None of them paid any attention. If they'd looked in Tesla's documents from the 1890s, there was the answer on how to stop that precession problem. And I mean, the saucers would do this when they hovered, and they couldn't see anything. Everything's doing this outside, you know.
Sure.
And when they move fast, it's just a mere wobble, high-frequency wobble. But Tesla just merely did some experimentation to figure out how to solve this problem, and apparently.
Now, prior, you felt that this precession had mostly to do with the movement of the electrical discharge.
The brush discharge.
Brush
which is
discharge.
used. The brush discharge is just like the Earth. It's like the aurora borealis. You have a brush discharge in the Earth. The Earth draws in the tubes of force, and it's also the place where a huge current is going into the Earth from the sun. And so there's a huge electric current going from the sun through frozen magnetic lines of force in space, through the Earth, and back to the equator of the sun, where it goes with the return current. And that's what imparts the momentum to the Earth around the sun. So this is documented and proven by the scientist Johannes Alfvén, the Norwegian scientist, who carried on some of the work that Alfvén did was based on the work before him of Christian Birkeland, who apparently was a Tesla nut too. And I believe that the reason they got into this area of research was because Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity, which was never published, had somehow leaked out. And so it looks like...
This is something you've been attempting to reconstruct through available text. The reference that you quote is his lecture before the immigrant welfare. What year was that?
Yeah, and he apparently had made the same announcements many years before, but he talked about it.
He actually used the term dynamic theory of gravity.
Yes, he mentions this in a number of places in his writings, and the stuff was published. However, he intended to publish it, but he never did, and he worked it out in 1893 and 94, which was, I got the papers that he wrote just before that, and that were part of his lectures in England, in New York, and Paris, and so forth. And in those lectures was this information that basically went into his dynamic theory of gravity, and then a few times, at later times, he would include little bits of the theory in there. And at one time, he released a lot of information on the theory in poetic form. And so basically what Tesla said was that in the 1890s was that the brush discharge brought in the tubes of force, and according to J.J. Thomson, when the tubes of force are drawn into a conductor and dissolved in it, it imparts momentum, because the space contains the mechanism for momentum. Well, Alfvén proves that most of the momentum of the solar system is in the planets. The sun has practically none because most of its momentum is being imparted and carried to the planets.
So this idea of centrifugal force creating some, after
baloney.
is
Even Einstein said there's no force at a distance as far as gravity is concerned. And he didn't even believe in the ether physics. But basically the theory is that there are all these onion-like layers in, for instance, the solar system of the sun's electrical energy, and the planets are traveling along certain lines of this.
It's almost like a toroid shape?
And the planets are driving along it, and the momentum they possess is brought in by the electric current and the tubes of force, which are on the Earth. The Aurora Borealis, this Birkeland, had said, well, there's no way that we can have these huge magnetic currents on the ground unless there's a current of billions of amps flowing into the Earth on the North Pole. And so the aurora is actually a brush discharge. Now, the Aurora Borealis is not the same as the Aurora Australis on the other end. It's a cloudier thing. That's positive corona versus negative corona. Negative corona. Then Tesla invented his highest form of his coil was the single terminal coil, which he discovered, and he said it's my way of creating DC current through induction. And what it does is it creates a high-frequency DC pulse. If you'll notice from those coils there, now he's got two on one circuit, you see.
Right.
Now that's...
You can point with the...
yeah, you've got two coils on one circuit. You've got this coil here and this coil over here. And then you look at these coils and you look here. Let's see, there it says P1, see?
Interesting
and
reference.
over here it says P2. So basically those are primaries, different primaries. And this, for instance, could be used. The only reason for having them in the same circuit is for flying saucer. In other words, this
it doesn't
coil...
make sense the way it's set up. I mean, if you are signaling, as the patent claims, system of signaling, you wouldn't have a wire that's connected for 300 miles to signal. It defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's all on the same oscillator. He's running these things on one oscillator. Now, this one over here is the one we should be looking at if you can get it in the picture. All right, that's more interesting because there you see the P1 and P2 right there, okay? Now, that's P2. It's expressed a little differently, but they didn't have these terms.
Now, this is the P2
1890s.
that you described in relation to the Pt.2 compass.
Yeah, and here you got a rotary spark gap powering two different oscillators. And notice that this capacitor has fewer plates than this one. And that's because this one is going to be tuned to a quarter wavelength. This one's going to be tuned to a half or a full wavelength. This one will produce a DC pulse, the brush discharge, what I call a pseudo-electrostatic discharge. This one produces an alternating high-frequency current. This is used on the bottom or the back of the ship to destroy the inertia. This is used to create the momentum in the direction of travel. So you basically can accelerate the ship and turn it at 90 degrees with this system by controlling the discharges and a polarity on the surface of the ship. Now, this particular coil is, if you notice, the primary is around the outside, and so the voltage increases towards the center. The primary is also connected to the secondary, so that at the same time the current enters the primary and travels around this direction, the current is entering the secondary and from the same source and traveling around this direction.
That's an interesting.
And it's like it's really kicking out that pulse, you see.
Yeah, that's totally different than how we're taught to build our Tesla coils these days for our little hobby kits.
Yeah. Well, see, Tesla said that the DC electrostatic charge allows the ether carriers to enter easily into the ship, whereas in the high frequency, it tends to collect the positive ions around the opposite end of the ship, and the positive ions basically stop the flow of the ether. So you don't have any resistance to movement because there's no inertia being imparted. You have an imbalance of forces. You have inertia in one direction and a blockage of the ether carriers on the other, so they can do nothing but enter the ship and dissolve and impart momentum. Now, to make this possible, the Earth is emitting rapidly varying electrostatic forces of tremendous potential. And that rigidifies the ether in Earth's vicinity, which is why the Michelson-Morley experiment was false, is because the ether is stationary close to the Earth, but as you get further away from the Earth, the ether is more in motion. So if you tried to detect an ether drift close to the Earth, you wouldn't detect one. It's rigidified by the electrostatic forces and moves with the Earth, whereas outside the Earth's field, it's in relative motion. So the ether drift experiment was based on a false premise of a dynamic ether.
So somehow Tesla, or von Braun, Wernher von Braun got a hold of this technology, and this is what he was developing in 1935?
See, Willy Ley was an expert on microwaves. He was the greatest expert on the microwaves maybe in the world in 1935.
And why would they need a microwave expert?
Yeah, why would they need a microwave expert? Now, what's interesting about Willy Ley is the government hired him in 1944. The Burke Aircraft Corporation moved to the environs of College Park, Maryland. And that, I believe, was the first American electropropulsive flying saucer project. That was after they discovered the Germans making these ships based on Tesla technology.
In Maryland?
And Maryland, it's right, College Park, Maryland, that's where the Goddard Institute is.
How about that? How
you know,
cozy.
and the Space Flight Center. So that's a very high priority to some guy who writes science articles and poetry books for children about science, you know, that was suddenly whisked away by the government after they realized that he was the only guy they knew who could tell them anything about this stuff. And so they hired him and put him to work right outside Washington, D.C. on some very high priority project.
So
Burke
keep an eye
Aircraft
on
Corporation of Georgia. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd like to take a really strange jump here and talk about flying submarines. You included in your book an interesting chapter on flying submarines, ? You claimed that possibly the Germans had developed or used submarine tubes to create flying machines.
Yes. Well, it'd be perfect. I mean, weight is no object because the electromagnetic interaction is 10 to the 40th power times stronger than the gravitational interaction. So that means that a very tiny amount of electrical energy can pick up a huge object. And what triggered my awareness of this submarine pressure hull concept was a person I know and his daughter witnessed one of these ships. This man went to Albuquerque to pick up his daughter at an airport, at the Albuquerque airport. And when they began to drive back, this ship was hovering over their car all the way back to Santa Fe. He even followed them to their house. And he said that it had an old iron, what looked like an old iron ship's hull. He could see rivets on it, and it hummed like a diesel engine.
Apparently these don't sound like alien spacecrafts from an advanced civilization.
Well, the ones in South America have been seen belching black smoke and making clanking noises. Probably some loose chain or something hitting the hull as they moved around, you see. I mean, but that would be perfect because the submarine pressure hull would be perfect for doing a prototype for von Braun's planned Mars mission because it contained a generator, all sorts of equipment you would need in a hermetically sealed environment. And the pressure hull is round, just like a cigar, and has slightly tapered ends on each end. And then around that, they built all of the ballast tanks and other things, and conning tower and everything. But the basic tube is just a round tube like that thing right there.
Yeah,
And
this is a picture we have of what's called here early 50s cigar craft seen by Joe Fieri near Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And it's very similar to what you're describing.
well, I have seen videos of a ship, and exact same description has been seen a number of times. One time off of South Africa, another time in Virginia, quite a few times in Colorado, and I have a video of the thing up in Idaho. And you can see it's silver. It's like stainless steel. And you can see halos around the ship. And as it's hovering, the halos are stationary. You can see the peaks and nodes of the high frequency, you see. And when the ship moves this way, the wave nodes move. If the ship moves this way, the waves nodes move this way. And if it's moving this way, they move the other way. But these are quite visible. I mean, I've seen it on television many times, and now I have my own video that was taken by some associates of this ship, and I can see the halo and the waveforms on the hull, and so it's perfect, verification of what I'm saying about the Tesla technology. The ship that really proved it to me was I saw a ship at Hyde Park in 1996, in January 1996, while I was at the 10,000 Waves Japanese bathhouse, and I was sitting in the tub with 6 other people, and there were some other people milling around, and I saw this flashing object comes along, and I watched it for a while, and I said, that is not an airplane. And I said, that's a UFO. And this guy across the tub said, it's a plane. I said, well, if it's a plane, why did it just park? And I said, look, here comes another one just like it. And there comes another one, parks near it. And I said, as long as they flash, I said that flying saucers put out a faint glow when they're moving slowly. When they move fast, they light up brighter, and that's the reason they're moving so slow, and the flash conceals the glow. I said, if this thing were to fly fast, it would light up real bright. And the thing lit up. It was huge compared to the little flashes. It looked like a little plane, but when it lit up at arm's length, it was this long, which means at that distance, it was about 10,000 feet. It was 400 feet long, approximately, and about 250 feet wide, and about 50 feet thick. It was shaped like a football field, rounded edges on it, and the thing took off and did a circle. As everyone watched with their jaws dropping, and I followed it with my finger. I said, everyone see that? And they said, yes. And I followed it around. It took about 10 seconds to make its circle, and it was about a 30-degree angle. So at 10,000 feet, that was 2,000 miles per hour, instant, and stopped on a dime. It took off instantly at that speed, came back, stopped instantly in the same spot, while the other ship was still there. And so it glowed a dark green color, and you could see the purple Tesla corona coming out from above on the top and in front of it, and the bottom
This represents
screwed
the
with a positive
negative charge.
Yeah, it's a negative charge. It's that purple Tesla corona going out in the sky like this, and on the bottom was a positive corona. It's a dark green. They had apparently used quite a number of technologies to try to make that ship invisible. It wasn't supposed to be visible, but it was visible because of the weather conditions at the time.
So this idea of UFOs appearing and disappearing before people's eyes wouldn't be too hard to swallow if what is happening with this electrical corona is distorting the area around the ship.
Plus, they move instantly. This thing can move in. If you're perpendicular to the line of flight, you cannot see it at that speed. If it's close enough, you can't see it at all when it's moving as fast as it can move. So it appears to just, they look like they're disappearing here and going over here. You see, they can jump around because you cannot see that ship when it's moving too fast. If they suddenly take off, it looks like they disappeared. All you see is it's gone. But they're just moving very fast. They can accelerate instantly.
So weight is no object.
Weight is no object.
Size is no object.
If you take a force, okay, if you take a stronger force, you can do a lot more work in the same period of time. Work is the ability to do work. I mean, energy is the ability to do work. Work is movement of a mass through a distance. Therefore, if you use a stronger force, you can do more work in the same period of time. So if you use a force which is 10 to the 40th power stronger than the gravitational force, you can do that much more work, 10 to the 40th power times more work in the same period of time with that force. Now that's a free energy idea, because if you take a weak force and convert it to that stronger force, you can do a lot more work than you could as a weak force. So you can take gravitational energy, convert it into electrical energy, and do 10 to the 40th times more work with it.
It would seem obvious why certain energy cartels wouldn't want that kind of information floating around.
It will destroy them when it gets out, and it will.
Yeah, I'd like to talk further on some more free energy ideas. Just to finish up with, actually I want to ask you about Kenneth Arnold and his sightings, but initially what is interesting about this flying submarine business is Kenneth Arnold had some interesting comments to make about some flying saucers that were appearing here in America. Arnold insisted nevertheless that Morella bring him up to date, finally settled for a written account for which he apparently was interviewing a lot of witnesses. At this time, the West Coast was experiencing a siege of reports about mysterious submarines operating off United States coastlines. Arnold told Klein he is convinced there is a definite link between the saucers and the submarines. There you go. He makes a reference to submarines and UFOs, which I
And
find
notice
an
he's
interesting
subjected to
coincidence.
press ridicule. That's interesting, see?
Yeah, why would that be?
If the government didn't know what it was, they would be the first to be there to interrogate Arnold to find out what it was. If they didn't know what it was, they would certainly be interested, and they certainly wouldn't want to ridicule somebody that they would like to debrief. I mean, that tells you right there. Now, what I'm saying is in the stalemate, they worked out certain conditions where the Germans continued to cooperate through the United States government in this stuff, and so the continuity wasn't broken between the German projects and the American projects. They brought 15,000 personnel to New Mexico with that, along with, there were 116 top scientists taken to Alamogordo, for example, and one of them was the one that tested the Lafrance project in the Baltic, the first firing of a rocket from underwater in one of these little Lafrance subs. And
Gee, where have we heard about that before?
yeah, and
Also, if we reference back to Kenneth Arnold's very famous sighting, which started the whole UFO craze in 1947. Right here we have his quote: "This very bright flash, like an arc light, was coming from a group of objects far up to the north of Mount Rainier in the area of Mount Baker, which is almost in line with Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. I saw a chain of peculiar aircraft approaching Mount Rainier very rapidly. They seemed to fly in an echelon formation. However, in looking at them against the sky and against the snow of Mount Rainier as they approached, I just couldn't discern any tails on them. And I had never seen an aircraft without a tail. These were fairly large-sized, and there were 9 of them." Like an arc lamp is an interesting reference.
that's Boeing territory, by the way. That's
Oh.
all the German scientists that worked out the contracts with Boeing aircraft were building American prototypes up there already by 1947.
Huh. Well, again, that's quite a coincidence. Here we have a picture of Kenneth Arnold himself holding up an interesting photograph of his flying saucer.
That's a drawing of the kind he saw.
Yes.
That looks a lot like a Horton flying wing.
Well, that's that's interesting you should mention that, because we have a picture of a Horton flying wing, so that we can make a comparison.
Yeah.
Gee,
Yeah.
you think that's what he saw?
But you see, that's the reason I think that there's a possibility that maybe Kenneth Arnold might be guilty of disinformation.
So
Because there
you feel...
you see jet engines, you see.
Sure.
That's not a flying saucer if you've got jet engines on it. See, it's
Well,
not
the
electrically
interesting
powered.
reference I'd like you to comment on is his remark about the blue light like an arc lamp. Do you feel that maybe he did see something, and that they were using something in addition to just turbojets on the back there?
They might have been trying to develop some sort of hybrid technology where they could see. One of the problems with some of these saucers is getting them off the ground, because what happens is the electrical energy tends to arc to the ground a lot of times, so they've got to get them up in the air somehow before they take off. And they've used various kinds of rocket and jet power sometimes to get them off the ground.
You mentioned that in respect to Lonnie Zamora's sighting.
And that's what they observed there, was these blue, what looked like maybe something like ion jets or something. You see, chemical rockets that were to get it up off the ground so they could kick in the electric power. That way they didn't need so much in the way of landing gear. If they could, if they could soften the landing on these things and the takeoffs, then they just needed some little pods that came out to land on.
Here's a photograph of his original sketch. Shows a wedge-type or heel-shaped craft. And here's an early photograph of, again, a heel-shaped craft. This looks like it has some kind of glow to it. Your comments?
Yeah, I think they were experimenting around with different shapes. Basically, I think it all has boiled down to what you might call the lenticular and the linear. Well, the lenticular type is a linear type, and the circular type. Basically, the ship that I saw at Los Alamos, at Hyde Park above Santa Fe, it was a huge lenticle, you see. It was a huge lozenge shape. And you think about that, it was as big as a football field with the track around it. 5-story building, 50 feet thick. I'm going on proportion because I worked with proportion as a sculptor and a painter, so I can calculate proportional shape and size and so forth pretty well. And this thing would be like a flying 5-story building as big as that shape inside a football field and a track. Now that's a huge ship.
That is huge.
And what are they going to do with this ship? Now, the big question of me is, how are they hiding these things?
Where are they hiding?
And I have heard all kinds of scenarios from reliable people, people who know about such landing schemes in places like Switzerland, where they have whole cliffs or whole mountainsides that slide out, and the ship goes inside, and then the whole mountain closes back up.
You're saying people might have seen something like this?
Yes, I know people that have seen stuff like this, and I also know that there are people who have seen these things go into water. So what would be better than to have a lake just as a landing pad for this ship? It goes underwater, and then there's a dolly down there that pulls it sideways into a place up the hill that's out of the water, or through an airlock.
In fact, there have been several sightings in Puerto Rico, in lagoons out there in Puerto Rico, and to make it even more convenient, these are held by the United States as wetlands, so that there's no human contact on these things, and these Puerto Ricans, these poor people, are seeing these lights going into the water over there. So that seems to be another cozy aspect of keeping this international biosphere program going on, is that you can do anything with the land that you want, including landing football-sized flying saucers under the water.
Well, all you need is unlimited funds, and and you've got it.
Yes. Who do we know that has unlimited funds?
Anything. You see, my theory is, this is the only thing that's theoretical that I'm saying, is, why have they kept it secret so long? And my theory is the big corporations don't want us to have this technology, because when you start making a list of everything that this thing is going to obsolesce, it's a lot.
It's a big
transportation, fuel, all kinds of things. Aeronautical companies, airlines, you name it. Spare parts. There's not a lot to wear out.
And who runs the airlines? The CIA?
Yeah.
You want to put them out of business?
You know, when you start looking at that, it's my opinion that the only reason the military even is allowed to use this technology is so that they can argue that it's a national security interest to be protected and use the government to protect the technology from us. In other words, to keep us from not talking about the Russians or Chinese. Their governments have this same technology. The only reason they keep it secret is to keep us, the citizens who pay for it, from finding out how and using it.
Right.
And so here's the government telling these outrageous lies to every child in America, every adult in America, and every old person in America about aliens. They've concocted this whole thing, and an intelligence network distributed it through
making sure that we're dumbed down enough to where a lot of people would actually buy that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at this recent scandal that they dug up about the dumbness of the school books they're writing.
Huh.
You know, that's no surprise to me.
No, of course not.
And,
actually, that's been an ever-present dream of certain groups in our society for over 100 years.
They've been stealing and hiding technology for so long, they don't want it to move any faster. They want it to move real slow.
Sure.
Because they've got all the technology they want us to have, and they want to keep it moving slow because they've got all that oil to sell us, and they're jacking up the prices whenever they think they can get away with it.
Sure.
And they know that every time they jack up the prices, though, it stimulates vapor carburetor research, and so they can only jack the price up for a while, and then they have to drop it back down again to kill the research. You see.
Then people forget about that. To give you an idea of what we were capable of in 1947, referring once again back to Kenneth Arnold's sighting, on the way he made some rough calculations of the speed of the formation from the timing he had done near Mount Rainier. He came up with an answer of around 1,700 miles an hour in 1947.
That could be the Horton jets, you see.
Do you think that they would achieve that kind of speed?
Yeah, I think they could have. You know, you never know how fast a plane goes. You can never rely on any published information about its speed. I mean, if you look at an old Jane's manual, you'll see that in many cases the top speed of the aircraft and all the other characteristics are classified, still classified at certain times. So they usually won't even tell you, and if they do tell you, you can't really know whether it's true or not. You know, it could be much faster.
Sure.
But you know, you never really know what the top speed of an aircraft is because usually they won't even publish it. They'll show the picture of it in the manual, but they won't tell you how fast its climb rate is and so forth. Its performance characteristics may be classified, but I believe they could have gotten, with some of those Horton planes, they could have gotten close to that. From what I saw, the pictures of these things, those are pretty advanced designs. What they do is they don't want this technology to go too fast. So they get a lead and they just want it to go at a certain speed as long as they're faster than the Russian planes or whatever.
Right. As long as, just to keep that edge.
Meanwhile, they're going 25,000 miles an hour, like the one I saw in 1953. And then they're talking, they've got articles all out there in the papers that they're controlling, talking about how we might be on the verge of discovering anti-gravity technology.
Yeah,
you know?
I suppose our old friend Murabo will figure that one out for us, too. I'd like to thank Mr. Lyne for being our guest on the 33rd Parallel. I hope there are many who feel as I do, that it's a good and healthy thing to entertain alternative views on items of such importance as our world history and scientific progress. This is, in fact, the primary objective of this video series. I hope you found it worthwhile, and remember, the truth can flow from lies, but lies cannot flow from the truth. Good night. A companion guide to the 33rd Parallel video series will soon be available. Look for it on our website at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. Also available now from the Flying Saucer Factory. a German U-boat on the United States coastline, a secret agreement between sworn enemies, an underground base built into the permafrost of Antarctica, Rear Admiral Byrd and his armada of 4,000 men, in a confrontation with unknown aircraft that can fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. When reading about it isn't enough, it's time to see what you've been missing. A graphic dramatization of Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump, fully illustrated by a top Disney TV animator. Order it now from the Flying Saucer Factory at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. And use in our daily lives. One is left wondering if scientists even care about the day-to-day phenomena that are still left unexplained. We may ask, what is gravity? And the answer is gravitons. Or, what is electricity? Well, it's electrons. Aside from their precious relativity, are there coexistent theories that are worth considering? After all, the majority of our greatest scientists, Michael Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, Sir William Crookes, and Lord Kelvin, never even heard of relativity, nor would it have helped them if they did. Just what made scientists want to embrace the peculiar claims of a second-rate clerk in a Swiss patent office as the preeminent end-all to scientific progress? As almost an apology to the unworkability of Einstein's rants, we are offered a steady stream of new and ever more complex quantum mechanics and string theory to dazzle us, or baffle us beyond belief. If Michael Faraday and Sir William Crookes never used relativity to further their understanding of gravity and electrodynamics, just what did they base their experiments on? And why do we never re-examine those concepts? Is there a forgotten physics with a different set of rules, hidden away from us early in the last century by a powerful elite who fear that the technology based on it will strip away their power and wealth and liberate us from their grip? A bold and outrageous statement that can never be proven, right? Wrong. William R. Lyne is our guest tonight. He's the author of 3 books.
Pentagon Aliens, formerly Space Aliens from the Pentagon, now in its 3rd printing, Occult Ether Physics, and The Free Energy Surprise. Mr. Lyne was born in Big Spring, Texas, and raised in the boom towns of the great West Texas wildcatters. He had the opportunity of being educated about fuel and its impact on industry firsthand. From there, he pursued an interest in aviation in Army Air Force, where he earned a position in Air Force Intelligence. He has acquired a BS degree with a double major in Art and Industrial Technology from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas in 1969. He also has the distinction of living in New Mexico for the past 25 years, during a time and place where knowledge of saucer technology necessarily meant knowing individuals who worked on top-secret projects at Los Alamos and Alamogordo, where individuals such as Werner von Braun and his Nazi collaborators were well known to the community at large, where, much like those individuals who had the misfortune of living in or near Mena, Arkansas, never got the chance to tell the rest of the world what was really going on. Well, today Mr. Lyne will do just that. Mr. Lyne, welcome to the 33rd Parallel.
Okay, I'd like to get into some free energy technology now. The first thing I'm really fascinated about is your discussion of the atomic hydrogen torque. Following video interview is controversial in nature and does not necessarily reflect the views of the producers nor mainstream academia. The viewer is encouraged to refamiliarize themselves with the standard historical and scientific text before making presumptive conclusions.
I'm not surprised at this recent scandal that they dug up about the dumbness of the school books they're writing. Here's the government telling these outrageous lies to every child in America, every adult in America, and every old person in America. They've been stealing and hiding technology for so long, they don't want it to move any faster.
Welcome to the 33rd Parallel, a video series about science, technology, and the politics that control it. For a long time now, scientists have been busy congratulating each other for proving some aspect of the theory of relativity. As recently as 1995, they've rewarded their colleagues with Nobel Prizes and declared long-held beliefs about the theory as proven fact. Meanwhile, we, as part of the unwashed masses, wait patiently for our eminent scientists to let us in on the joke. Aside from the atomic bomb, just what part of this illustrious concept can we hold in our hand?
Well, it says here reduces this to 5,340 degrees. But it talks about the what you're talking about as far as recombining.
Yeah.
So all these books are making mistakes, I guess.
The thing that's interesting is that liquid hydrogen is 99% atomic hydrogen. Or,
right?
no, there's ortho and parahydrogen. I can't remember which is which, but one of those states of hydrogen has a lot more energy. Just because they're not pointed opposite directions, the atoms are pointed the same direction. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is another free energy process hiding in there between ortho and monohydrogen. Ortho and parahydrogen. Because it takes less energy to create parahydrogen than you get back when they convert.
How about that?
And that's just another one of those little free energy processes. The same thing happens, when you compress it and liquefy it, it takes less energy to vaporize it again than it took to compress it.
Really?
In other words, when you can vaporize it easier than you compress it. So you get a gain in energy just like that. And you can do the same thing with liquid air.
It happens quite a few times in nature, and yet we're taught to ignore that again. I don't see how people...
See, I don't think it's
see how
magic.
science people can explain this stuff away all the time.
I just think that these elements are absorbing energy from cosmic sources when they're in a state of change. And because Tesla's theory of radioactivity is that the radioactive elements are not producing the radiation. They actually are being produced by the element reacting with zero-point radiation, what he called the primary solar rays or starlight, a very high-frequency form of radiation that's produced in stars. And he called this the primary solar rays, and I call it the zero-point radiation because this matches the definition today. And this radiation is ubiquitous. It comes from all directions. It's so high frequency it doesn't react with most matter at all. It passes right through everything. But I believe that certain elements, when they react and change, when they're in a change of state, or let's say they're in an act of mutation, such as in K-capture, that they react with this and produce a radioactive effect. Because I don't think they've ever proven that mass loses weight through radiation.
And if anybody's a welder these days, they probably haven't even heard of an atomic hydrogen torch. Maybe you might want to explain a little bit about that and why it's so special.
Interesting thing is, since I came out with this material, just this year, in the immediate future, General Electric is now issuing a new version of an atomic hydrogen torch. Isn't that interesting?
How about that?
And
how did that happen?
A person phoned me the other day and told me all about it. And they have a new atomic hydrogen torch they're preparing to release for the public. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Isn't that a coincidence that it was dead for all those years?
Yeah.
And now I published something on it, and now they're coming out with it.
Now, I wonder how they're going to explain the inordinate amount of energy. You might want to maybe talk about why this is so special, this torch.
Well, of course, the discovery of the atomic hydrogen, what I call the atomic hydrogen process, was supposedly made by Langmuir about 1909 or 1912. And he was a chemist who had a lot of discoveries in the area of electrolysis and so forth. And he claimed, and of course the thing about Langmuir is he was an early relativist. So
right?
he believed in relativistic, what I call RQMs, relativistic quantum mechanics. And he basically, believed in the idea that however much energy was produced when the hydrogen recombined was the amount of energy it took to separate the hydrogen molecules into from diatomic molecules into monoatomic hydrogen. So basically, this process involves the separation of hydrogen, which tends to come as diatomic molecules, two atoms together, into its separate atoms. And then when those atoms come back together, they release 109 kilocalories per mole.
It sounds like a lot.
Molecules, per mole. And so that is a lot of energy. Now, what I found was a well-known Encyclopedia of Science, which says that it takes 103 calories per gram mole to separate the hydrogen, although the relativistic quantum mechanics say that it takes the same amount of heat to separate the molecules as you get back when they recombine.
So you're getting nothing in this
You end
reaction.
up getting it all, that you're just using electrical energy to separate it, and then you get it back when it combines. Well, why even do it? I mean,
Right.
If you could just do it with electricity, except you get temperatures that are far above what you would get with an electric arc.
In fact, you discovered an old text on this reaction, and even a photograph of an atomic hydrogen torch. Hydrogen being set free in a chemical reaction is often more reactive than hydrogen gas. The activity of such nascent newborn hydrogen in the act of liberation from its compounds is due to the hydrogen being in the atomic state. And down here, hydrogen molecules dissociate to atoms endothermically at high temperatures. Heat of dissociation about 103 calories gram mole. An electric arc or by irradiation. The hydrogen atoms recombine at the metal surface to provide heat for the acquired welding.
Now, I've been assured that this has to be a typographical error on the part of the Van Nostrand Encyclopedia people, even though this particular paragraph comes out of what is something like the 5th edition. Now,
Is that right?
they're
so 5 editions of mistakes.
Yeah, 5 editions. They have just carried this. Nobody's caught it, And the thing is this company published books on Tesla at one time when Tesla was alive.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, same company.
Well, that's interesting that they would claim that they've made mistakes in 5 editions. Here we have this is circa 1933. It's a welding book, welding and its applications, and it has here atomic hydrogen arc welding. In general, it says here, molecular hydrogen, or hydrogen in its normal state as distinguished from atomic hydrogen, is a diatomic gas. That is, each molecule consists of 2 atoms. When hydrogen is broken down into the atomic form, it is very active and has great tendency to recombine to form molecular hydrogen. This is exactly what happens in the atomic hydrogen process. When the molecular hydrogen passes through the arc, much of it is changed into the atomic state and thus absorbs considerable amount of energy. In escaping the arc stream, these atoms recombine into molecules again at the outer edge of the arc fan, and the extra energy is released as heat. This extra heat is added to the intense heat of the arc itself, produces a temperature that is somewhat higher than either the ordinary arc or the gas flame. Theoretical temperature of the atomic hydrogen flame has been found to be 7,254 degrees Fahrenheit. However, heat absorption due to the formation of atomic hydrogen